Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining. We'll give everyone a second to log on, and then Jordan's going to kick us off.
Perfect.
Welcome, Oklahoma educators.
Yeah, we'd love to know where you're from, what you teach. If you want to pop that in the chat, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves as everyone's kind of getting logged in here. Oh.
Thank you, Misty. First one.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, Misty.
Welcome.
Tina.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everyone, and happy Tuesday.
Yeah.
Last day in November. It's hard to believe that tomorrow's like December already. It just comes around so quickly.
Well, and we made it. We made it to December.
That's right.
Well, I'll go ahead and get us going here. I'm Jordan Baker. First off, thank you guys so much for joining us. I know after school on a Tuesday, yeah, we really appreciate you all being here. Like I said, I'm Jordan Baker. I am your rep for Amplify here in Oklahoma. I see some familiar faces and names coming through. Many of you probably know that I have recently joined Amplify, and one of the biggest things that drew me to Amplify was all of the amazing work that Amplify has done and continues to do around the science of reading. So we're really excited to share with you a little bit more about the science of reading and give you a sneak peek about CKLA and how that fits with the science of reading. So we've got a great team of ladies here who are literacy experts and experts in all things science of reading and CKLA that are going to be kind of guiding our conversation and our discussion today. So I will let Megan and Karen take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Jordan. And as you mentioned, today is all about looking at the science of reading shift and what that looks like in core instruction through using Amplify's core program CKLA. And so we just want to thank you not only for joining, but sharing where you're joining from. And we'll go ahead and get started with introducing ourselves. I will turn it over to my colleague, Karen, who's going to get us started with this.
All right. Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Venditti, coming to you from outside of Chicago in cold Northwest Indiana today. I have been working with educators across the country for about going into my 8th year with Amplify and high quality instructional materials in the classroom, all of the tools. So it's really exciting. I came from the first grade reading recovery, as well as a middle school language arts teacher. So I felt pain of kiddos coming to me without the explicit systematic instruction that is based, on the science of reading, and what a challenge it is to meet their needs when they get to middle school. And that's kind of thing that I keep in the back of my mind as we talk about the science of reading, as I meet folks in the field, just like I met Megan as she was implementing CKLA.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And my name's Megan Mobert. I'm actually from South Louisiana. The majority of my time in the classroom was really spent in those foundational years. So opposite of Karen, and that I spent my time in kindergarten through 2nd grade. These are those foundational skill years that are really like impactful on setting students up for success with reading proficiency. So when they get to, upper grades, that they are proficient readers. And so it was really through my experience with teaching reading in the classroom that led me on this science of reading journey through implementing Amplify CKLA. So I've had the privilege of working with educators across the country who, like myself, were putting the science of reading into action through using Amplify CKLA. And that's where I met Karen here. And so we want to know, though, where you are on your science of reading journey. So we're actually going to launch a poll here. We want to hear from you. So how familiar are you with the science of reading? And Karen and I always talk about this, no matter how many times or how much research we dive into in the science of reading, it's always good to hear it through or learn about things through a different lens or a different voice. So we just launched this poll to see how many of you are familiar with the science of reading. So we'll see if you're answering as these are coming in.
I'll give you a few seconds to select one of those choices. And Megan and I continue to learn. So we are always feeling like no matter who we're hearing, it's all about lifelong learning.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and end this. And it looks like some of you have had some exposure and you're ready to learn more. Look, you know what? I can actually try and let me see if I can reshare this. Let's try this. Is this working?
Yes.
There we go. Okay.
Results.
So I could see some, but not all. So here we go. Now that we have your, everyone's able to really access this poll, I'll go ahead and share these results here in about 10 seconds. I know that no matter where we are, how many times we hear it, it's good to hear it over and over again. But today really is about looking at the science of reading and looking at a core program that's going to put this research into action. So as you see, the majority say, I'm pretty familiar and I'm eager to add to my knowledge base. And that's what being a reflective practitioner is all about, right? Is looking at what you are learning, this learning journey, and continuing to grow that knowledge to do what's best for kids. After all, we all show up or get in our cars every day, drive to school, and that's our goal, right? We want to do what's best for kids. And so that is one thing that we all have in common. But the one thing that the pandemic has definitely done, I'll go ahead and just talk about the like womp womp here, is that the pandemic has really alerted us and kind of brought to light the research-based practices that aren't being implemented. And what it brought to light too was that sequential order of skills. Like when the pandemic hit, it just presented this this opportunity where, or this situation where we couldn't provide explicit systematic instruction if we weren't using, or we didn't know what skills students had been taught if we weren't using explicit systematic instruction. So we saw this learning gap just skyrocket. But you know what, Karen? We can talk about the pandemic all day long, right? It's fresh on everyone's minds. But the real reason is that this, or the real issue or challenge is that this has been around for decades.
Exactly. And so the NAEP data that you might be familiar with or may not be familiar with, goes back, look at, we're starting that at 1992, that graph. So thinking about that many, many years, what have we been doing or not doing to change the trajectory for kids? And so as Megan and I share today, and many of you who are familiar, some of you who are new, today's your introduction, so thank you, or we appreciate that. But what can we do to help change that trajectory for kids? And looking at the research-based practices that are all over the place in terms of discussion around the science of reading, that's what we want to do. We want to focus on that, Megan.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just been this huge push for states nationwide to implement high quality instructional materials that align with science-based reading practices. And so we've had this call to action, right? And it's so honoring to be part of this movement where educators are saying, hey, you know what, we look at that trajectory or those decades of NAEP data, and it's not matching the immeasurable efforts we put forth. We've got to make a change. We've got to make a shift. And that's exactly what educators like you in the great state of Oklahoma are looking to do. In fact, not only have not only has there been this national push for science-based, building capacity around science of reading research, but Amplify has been a huge leader in this space with our very own Science of Reading podcast, who is hosted by Susan Lambert, who was going to join us today, but unfortunately she is under the weather. So she was really sad about that and said, send Oklahoma educators my best. But this is a great place to access research in such an accessible way. And it seems like the educators in Oklahoma are doing exactly that. And so, yeah, Kristen, I agree. The podcast is phenomenal. Karen always shares it's like the best ongoing professional learning that is so easy to listen to. But what is happening as we build capacity around the science of reading research is that we're seeing districts really turn to Amplify as they're evaluating their literacy system and saying, hey, you know what, we need to make sure that all of our, our core program, our, universal literacy screening, and also our differentiated practice and instruction is really grounded in science-based reading research. And that's exactly why districts are turning to Amplify, because we do have a literacy system that brings these key components together. And one of the great things about it is that we've been doing this from the beginning. We've been building our literacy system from the beginning on science of reading research. And so when we look at Amplify's literacy system, MClass is our assessment platform that actually measures those critical skills that we need to know where students are and making progress towards mastering those. Are they on the path to proficiency, or are they at risk reading failure? And that also determines the overall health of core instruction. And for us, that is Amplify CKLA, which we're going to take a dive into today. But it's also giving teachers a way to provide targeted remediation and enrichment, outside of the core, both in a small group setting and when students are out of reach with Amplify reading. So we're going to level set really quickly. What is the science of reading, right? This is what it's about. You're committed to learning what it takes for kids to be successful. And this is where we're going to start.
And so I think that some of you may be very familiar with this, and those folks that are at the familiar stage, you definitely are. Those that are new, this maybe really kind of jumps out at you and makes a real impression. Philip Goff and William Tunner's work around that simple view of, they called the simple view of reading, wasn't so simple. It is a simplistic image here, where we've got word recognition as well as language comprehension, two factors that are both just as important as the other to develop proficient readers. And so we can't have one without the other. Notice that multiplication symbol. We can't have one without the other, because if we've got a 0 in either one of those boxes, we know what happens. We don't have to be math experts to know what happens to that reading proficiency. And so we have to address both of those. And we want to do that in an equal fashion. In order to become that proficient reader, we're going to do that. And so as we look at the top half of the rope, of Scarborough's rope, or that part of Goff and Tumner's work around oral language development, we're going to look at some strands in Hollis Scarborough's work that are to be identified, that are constantly being developed our entire lives. These start from the get-go, and these are something that we're going to continue to work on as we grow. Today you're learning. Today you're listening to me and Megan speak about the science of reading, about CKLA, and you're going to learn some things about that. And so as we think about that top half of the rope, what's happening, there are two keys, and this is the key in terms of oral language development. We're working on, we are wired for this from the get-go, right? As I shared, we're going to start, we start hearing things as a baby, and we continue to receive that information, receive that oral language, and that becomes our expressive. So our receptive language becomes our expressive language, we hope, and we continue to develop that. And so that's where, when our kiddos may not have the language, may not be able to, pull the vocabulary or have that knowledge because they haven't been exposed to it, it's really challenging. And we can't necessarily expect them to if we've never exposed them to that. And so that's what a lot of this puts kids at a disadvantage. And I'm sure you can probably think of kiddos that come with a disadvantage because that oral language development hasn't been fostered from early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about word recognition, right? What is it? Let's level set here for those people who are just coming, beginning their science of reading journey. But also when we look at word recognition, this is really just the ability to lift words or text off of the page and recognize those words correctly and automatically. But in order to develop word recognition, one must be able to understand that the language that we're speaking is actually made up of sounds, and then understand how to connect those sounds to their symbolic representations or their sound spellings or letters when they're actually represented on paper. And that has to be so automatic that decoding of words becomes almost effortless. But the crazy thing is that unlike language comprehension, like Karen just talked about being developed naturally from birth, word recognition, the bottom strand of the reading rope, is not developed naturally. In fact, according to science, our brains are not wired to read. It takes explicit systematic instruction to develop this component of reading. So I'm going to be taking a deep dive into word recognition and showing you what that looks like when using Amplify CKLA. How do we really develop that? But we have to really kind of begin with the basics, the foundations of this. What does classroom instruction look like when it's grounded in science of reading research? And so, as I mentioned, we're going to be diving into Amplify's core pre-K through fifth grade comprehensive literacy program. And when districts choose Amplify CKLA to implement within their schools or within their districts, what they're saying is, hey, you know what? We are ready to take a different approach. We've learned about the science of reading, and we recognize and value that this instruction or science-based reading practices are put into, or instruction is put into practice through Amplify CKLA. So teachers across the district, across the school, can actually bring this research into life in a way that provides every student with equitable learning opportunities. So when we look at even the reading rope and Amplify CKLA's program structure, we can really see how the structure reflects how the brain learns how to read in those early years, in those K-2 years. So in Amplify CKLA, we actually take a two-strand approach in kindergarten through second grade. So CKLA is going to develop word recognition, that bottom strand of the rope, in our foundational skills strand. This is really where we're building the nuts and bolts of early literacy through using an explicit, systematic approach to teaching foundational skills. So this is really where kiddos are learning how to crack the code, which enables or unlocks the way to reading. But that top strand, language comprehension, in CKLA, we're going to build oral language competencies in our knowledge strand. So this strand, as Karen mentioned, going back to Goff and Tunner's analysis, this is placing an equal emphasis on building language comprehension in this knowledge strand. So that way we're allowing kids, we're building out background knowledge and vocabulary, which is going to enable kids to bring this oral language to complex text so that they can really access them, make those meaningful connections, and also analyze and express their understanding of the text in which they're reading. But in third through fifth grade, we'll actually see a bit of a shift.
And so, as Megan shared, what's happening in K-2 is a critical piece to help kids get to that point where they can text, they can do those close reading activities, that text analysis that happens so often as we start in those intermediate grades and move our entire lives. And so the practice that we provide for them with those oral language, with that, speaking and listening, those stories that they're hearing written from a higher level are going to prepare kids so that when they have to do that on their own, or when that productive struggle that teachers are scaffolding them and guiding them through, they're going to have a repertoire to be able to pull from because they've heard so many different stories and had that background built for them.
So now let's dive into word recognition. And this is where we'll look at our core program and foundational skills. But let's dive into the brain real quick. In your brain, if everyone right now on the call takes their hand and touches the middle left side of their brain, this is your speech center. This is where, whenever you're talking, this is like where millions of neurons are firing. But if you move your hand to the back of your brain, this is your vision center. So thinking about a baby recognizes faces really effortlessly, objects, right? And does that really in an effortless way. But when we think about these two centers in the brain, the visual zone at the back of the brain and the spoken language zone in the middle, we're actually, when we're building decoders, when we're building skilled, fluent readers, we're actually trying to connect to these two, right? So as students look at the sound or the symbol, the letter, the sound spelling correspondences, we want that to connect to that speech center in such a quick, automatic way. But as I mentioned, our brains are not wired to read. So there's this critical switchboard or circuit in between those pathways. No one's born with it. And that little switchboard just so happens to be the vital connection that enables reading. So that switchboard is actually called the visual word form area. Bottom line is this: if you have it, you can read. If you don't, you cannot. So when we think about word recognition and our responsibility as educators, especially in those foundational years, it's all about developing those pathways between the vision and speech center, developing that visual word form area. So that way the brain has the ability to transfer written words or text in that vision center into speech, whether those words are spoken or not. The absence of those pathways, even if they're weak, is what makes learning to decode an unnatural process, or sometimes a process that we really see gaps in, especially down the road. This is why it is imperative that we use explicit, systematic, foundational skills instruction to develop skilled decoders. So thinking about explicit, what should explicit look like in the classroom? Leaving nothing to chance as the teacher, right? We're explicitly stating what students should be learning. So for example, when we're learning about the t sound, we're telling students, boys and girls, today we're learning about the t sound as in today. And it's represented by the letter T, or, it's represented by the t sound is represented by the letter T. That direct instruction is more effective than the discovery method, because it doesn't rely on assuming that kids have the prerequisite skills to discover that new learning on their own. So even thinking about phonological awareness, have all kids been taught how to, or phonemic awareness, blend and segment sounds orally? Do they have that? Have they all had that explicit instruction? But when we talk about systematic, this means we're following a continuum from, teaching the most simple or easy skills and building on those skills to teach the more complex skills as we slowly introduce, new skills and building on what's known. This makes learning for kids more obvious and easier as they connect to what's familiar. So we know too that effective teaching is going to require us to spiral back and give kids multiple at-bats for mastering these skills. So when we look at explicit and systematic, one of the first things you need to look at when looking at it, or when reviewing a core program, is let me see that scope and sequence, right? Is it using sequential systematic instruction that is grounded in how the brain learns how to read, starting with phonological awareness? So CKLA's core instruction beginning in kindergarten is really rooted in phonological awareness here, where we're actually learning to manipulate large chunks of words to develop skills like syllabication and rhyming. And then before we ever introduce letters and connect them to print and their sounds and all of the things, it's not letter of the day or letter of the week instruction. In fact, going back to explicit, we want to make sure that all students have been taught how to do this. And so before we even move forward here, even something as simple as counting environmental sounds, which I'm excited to jump into here in a bit. Not all kiddos can do this, but we assume they can, right? And so we'll talk about that being a prerequisite skill. But these skills are so necessary in explicitly teaching before shifting to phonemic awareness, where we're going to really look at blending and segmenting sounds orally in words, not connecting to print. So these are the foundational skills when it comes to teaching a kid how to read. This is what starts the pathways connecting between the speech and vision center. And so we can't assume kids have these. And also when you're building a house, if you've ever built a house, you know how important that foundation is. No one wants a faulty foundation. And so we have to make sure these skills are solid and that this is where the scope and sequence begins before making that shift to phonics instruction and teaching them most simple sound spellings, and then building on those to teaching more advanced sound spellings here. Now, when you're looking at a scope and sequence, I'm sure many of you already know this in the call, but for those of you who don't, there are 44 sounds in the English language. In those K-2 years, we need to give students the instruction and practice needed to master all of those sound spellings that represent those 44 sounds. And so right now, we want to know if you're actually using an explicit systematic phonics program in your school. And so are you currently using an explicit systematic phonics program in your school?
All right, the answers are coming in. Don't be
Yes,
shy.
absolutely. Let's see here. All right, it looks like we've had great responses. And I love the vulnerability of everyone on the call. As we look at this, I'll share the results here. 14 of you said yes, and then we had some who said not yet. And then some of you said, not a full program and we use pieces. And that vulnerability is exactly why you're here today, to learn about CKLA and how this does provide this comprehensive approach and this way to provide explicit systematic instruction that is grounded in research. So what does this look like day to day, right? What should this look like day to day? And so that's where we're really going to be diving in. We need to make sure, and in CKLA, this is what we do. We teach kids how to read starting with sounds first as they develop those strong phonological and phonemic awareness skills. But as a CKLA teacher, you're explicitly teaching all those sound spellings, and you're giving students deliberate practice opportunities to apply those skills through reading connected text and then writing about the text in which you're reading. So some of you said, you know what, we are currently using an explicit systematic approach. So we're actually going to be sharing the Science of Reading Making the Shift ebook. And as we go through this, we're going to provide you with a checklist to really evaluate, hey, look, are we really using all the key characteristics of effective explicit systematic instruction that is grounded in reading research? And so that requires us to really start with that top, with looking at word recognition, that top strand with phonological awareness. And so things to ask yourself whether it's evaluating your current program or looking at new programs is, are there frequent opportunities for students to engage in sound and wordplay? And so, stepping back from that letter of the day or letter of the week instruction, we need to make sure we're giving students those oral opportunities to engage in wordplay. And also, are we using that sounds first approach? And in Amplify CKLA, when I talk about moving slow to go fast, really laying that solid foundation, this is what it's about. I mentioned environmental sounds, right? So as a kindergarten teacher, CKLA teachers actually, on the first day of school, ask students to count environmental sounds, to distinguish between different environmental sounds. And sometimes teachers who haven't learned about the science of reading say, wait, why would we do this? Where's our letter of the day instruction? But this, guys, is such a critical skill because we're actually asking students to distinguish between different sounds orally. And this is a prerequisite skill for actually segmenting sounds down the road in words, right? And so to their surprise, when kindergarten teachers actually end up doing this, they're like, wow, so many of my kids couldn't even count those environmental sounds. And it goes to show that as educators, we really just assume that kiddos can do this, but we have to take a step back. But also when we talk about phonological awareness instruction, before introducing sounds and connecting them to print, we need to make sure that we're teaching kids how to blend and segment words orally. So we're not going to wait until we teach all of the alphabetic code and then go back and ask students to blend those sounds. In fact, as we're introducing students to sounds, they're going to work with blending and segmenting those sounds orally in words in Amplify CKLA. And this is laying that solid foundation. But also when we look at introducing a new sound in Amplify CKLA, we're actually using a sounds first approach because research shows that this really benefits the greatest number of students. So what does this look like for you as an educator? Well, CKLA's instructional roadmap really lays this out for you. It provides that roadmap that gives you the directions for, introducing a new sound that sounds like this. Boys and girls, today we're going to learn a new sound. We're going to learn the sound. Can you say the sound? And then as first graders, because this is a first grade lesson, you may stretch it out horizontally, vertically, say it in a mouse voice, in a monster voice, in a smart first grade voice. And then your kiddos would listen to and repeat words containing the sound after you. But what this is doing is it's giving them that opportunity to engage in wordplay, hearing those sounds, and then moving to sound riddle, right? Can they give you the answer to the sound riddle that contains the sound? And if not, what am I going to do about it, right? If they can't hear that sound, when it's time to connect it to print, I really need to intensify my instruction, provide scaffolding and support in a way that is that my students need. But maybe it's just that students need additional auditory opportunities to hear the sound. And so CKLA provides kids with this really engaging way to hear these songs on our sound library. And also get kids up and moving. Instruction should be engaging and fun on the Digital Student Hub. So I know we've heard from educators that kiddos get to get up and move, bring their TikTok dance moves to the classroom and hear that sound spelling or that sound in words in that fun, catchy song. So we've just looked at what that looks like with phonological awareness, and that's going to be continuous across K-2. Even going back to orally blending and segmenting sounds and words, you'll see this as warm-ups. But as we move into this second strand, the decoding strand of the reading rope, some things we should really ask ourselves. I mentioned there are 44 sounds in the English language. And so are all 44 sounds clearly outlined in that scope and sequence? And are decoding and encoding practice opportunities taught in tandem? What we want to avoid is, incidental phonics or, haphazard phonics instruction, I think is the best way to put it. Are we providing instruction and then giving students the opportunities to apply with just the skills we've already taught? Or are we asking them to apply skills we haven't taught? So when we look at that first bullet pointer, what to ask, how do we know if all 44 sounds are included? And then also, are all of those sound spellings represented in that scope and sequence? Which brings us to this next poll question. How many sound spellings represent the 44 sounds in the English language? And it looks like I left off an S on there. So we just launched a poll. I'm anxious to see what you all say. We have some great answers coming in.
People were quick to answer that one.
Right. And, this is just validation that the job you do in teaching kids how to decode words is a really important, but also challenging job, because the English language has 44 sounds, but we know as educators that it would be so much easier if we just had 44 sound spellings, but that's not the case. In fact, as we look at your answers, you're well aware of this at work, right? So your answers are reflecting that that there's a lot more of these sound spellings than there are sounds. And so as we look at this, majority of you selected 120 as the sound spellings. But if you are one of the 4 who selected 150, you can go ahead and kiss your brain. And I do see, I do see that some of you are gonna kiss your brain here with those of you who selected the right answer. So looking at that scope and sequence, hey, are we explicitly teaching all of those sound spellings before kiddos move on to 3rd grade? And what does this look like? Well, we want to teach the most simple, most useful sound spellings in kindergarten with the basic code, and that's what we're going to do in CKLA. And then we're going to build on that code knowledge to teach the more complex sound spellings across 1st and 2nd grade. But the key is that we want all kiddos to go on to 3rd grade having the code knowledge to actually crack the code as they encounter words. But one of those other key identifiers in looking at decoding is, are we teaching decoding and encoding in tandem? Well, the purpose of decoding is to be able to read words or sound out words, right? Put those sounds together to read the words, lift them off the page. But encoding is used for spelling. And so in CKLA, students actually receive frequent practice with the sounds and sound spellings they've been taught to develop skills like word awareness. So one of those opportunities is through chaining here. And so you see on the left, we're going to provide teachers opportunities to provide teachers opportunities to give students or engage students in developing word awareness through reading words, changing, manipulating, adding, subtracting, deleting individual phonemes at a time. So we can see these kiddos on the right doing exactly that. So this is actually called chaining for reading. But we're also going at the same time, going to give kiddos the opportunity to build words as they're learning those new sound spellings. So what you see here in this video is this teacher, these kids are using CKLA's large letter chaining cards to build the word man. And the teacher is actually going to say alakazam here. And the students are going to change this word man into main. So we can even see that conceptual leap here from the CVC words to now having this vowel team. But as students are also, learning these sounds, even in kindergarten, they have their own chaining folders where they might build the word at, and as they're learning the digraph, they're using their letter cards to change at to that. This is a key characteristic of effective, explicit, systematic foundational skills instruction, and so is dictation. So in CKLA, one of the many deliberate practice opportunities is dictation. This is also giving students that opportunity to really produce these sound spellings in words. This is the more complex, that chaining for spelling and also dictation is really more complex than actually just blending those sounds. We're asking students to really produce these sound spellings and words correctly. So we can see even that conceptual leap there. But the last strand here is really looking at sight recognition. So when we think about the brain, we want those pathways to be so strong that the coding of words is really automatic. So giving students the pathways to develop, to automatically connect those sounds of language to their sound spellings. And this is really the goal of developing sight recognition. Now, when we are looking at what to ask, do students receive explicit instruction in the code before practicing with a connected text? Now, this is key. And are students taught to attend to all the sounds in each word? So some practices that we really want to move away from is, during core instruction, using grade level text to apply the foundational skills, the grade level foundational skills that we're explicitly teaching is going to be key. We want to move away from any practices that don't do that. Also, something that is different when looking at science-based practices is, are we still teaching kids how to just memorize words with flashcards, or are we really giving them that opportunity to develop those pathways? And are we, we really want to move away from encouraging students to guess at words, but what do high quality instructional materials look like when they meet these necessary requirements? And so looking at high frequency words, this is a question we always really, get when working with kindergarten teachers is, tell us about your high frequency word instruction in CKLA. And so in CKLA, we're actually teaching tricky words. So you'll see that students who, looking at the Dolce and Fry list, words like at and on and it, those words are going to become decodable based off of the instruction, the explicit systematic foundational skills instruction that you're providing. But there are some high frequency words that we know that kids need to learn to read, even grade level text that aren't necessarily decodable up until that point. So we're going to draw awareness to the sound of the word that is doing what it's supposed to. So looking at the word funny, these kindergartners would have already learned the sound, but they haven't learned that second syllable, and especially Y at the end making the E sound. So that part of the word is tricky. And so we're drawing awareness to that part of the word that is not decodable up until that point. So we're giving students opportunities with that explicit high frequency word instruction. But when it comes to the actual strategy for reading, this is where you can really look at your practices and say, am I really implementing science-based reading practices? And so that really starts with blending here. So going back to those oral blending activities, this is where we're going to really connect those sounds that we're blending to print here. So in this video, even this little girl is talking about before she could learn how to read, she would blend the sounds into words orally. And here we see her saying cat. And now we have the teacher explaining that, kids in CKLA do this because we want them to be able to push through those words in their grade level connected text. And so this is where students are applying these skills that have all been explicitly taught. And the importance of this is that we're never, because CKLA student readers are on level, they follow the phonics scope and sequence, and also they're never giving students or making students guess at words. We're explicitly teaching them the reliable reading strategies for decoding, which is blending. So we're giving them that opportunity to master, but it's all about building fluency too. And so when we look at CKLA's decodable text, students never encounter a word that they would have to guess at. That is a practice we want to step away from, but also they're following diverse characters across various adventures, even in these chapter books, because they're in chapter book format. Here you see Green Fern Zoo, students are meeting Vern. He's taking them on an adventure across the Green Fern Zoo. But right at point of view, students are also seeing supports that are bolded here for that newly learned sound spelling. And as a classroom teacher, for you, this looks like this. You might work with students in a small group during this time. They might partner read, right? But all in all, you're meeting the needs of your kids by grouping your students according to where they are in demonstrating the need during that core instruction program, and also through their daily formative assessments. Now, we just looked at word recognition, all those things you should ask yourself. And now we're going to move to language comprehension. And this is really developing those oral language competencies that Karen is going to dive into with CKLA.
I think I was muted. Sorry about that. Thanks. I always love hearing Megan share about word recognition because we know this as well as language comprehension are just as important as each other. And so now we're going to focus on the language comprehension aspect of Goff and Tumner's work. And so let's start that by asking another poll question. Are you currently, because we're going to focus on that knowledge aspect, the oral language building, are you currently using a knowledge-rich curriculum? Are you focused on that as well as so many of you are using an explicit systematic in foundational portion? And I think we're seeing a lot of answers come in quickly. I love it. We'll give you a second to answer. I see people on all sides of the poll here. So I'm going to give people one more second and we'll share those results. Are we sharing those results? There we go. So we've got a little bit of kind of it even. We've got people trying to include more knowledge. And I think that's with the emphasis, as Megan shared earlier, with that kind of national discussion around how important it is to include content and focus on that oral language as well as the word recognition, the science of reading. So people are starting to do that. And so I'm glad to hear that. As Megan shared, as you are looking at the components around Hollis Scarborough's language comprehension side of that rope, I want you to think about that as you can compare that to what you're currently doing. And so as we look at language comprehension, thinking about background knowledge first, that's where we're going to get the knowledge building aspect. You know, am I including lots of science, social studies, literature, the arts, all of that? Are they relevant for kiddos? Do they challenge kiddos, and are they interacting with that text? And that's really key. Lots of speaking, writing, listening, all of that. And so how do we do that? Well, we want to start with really intentional sequence. And that's one thing you want to think about, not just random types of topics, but are they building on each other? And so you want to see building across grades. You want to see building within grades, because we know that standards build, right? Skills and competencies build. And so we want to make sure that that's happening in a very sequential way, but also spiraling of those skills, as well as vocabulary. We want to see that our words being used in one domain that are going to transfer that here to vocabulary. And so sometimes just looking at titles don't jump out at you, saying, oh, is this going to connect? But it's really neat. I'll give you one example in CKLA. When you mythology, we love to include aspects of mythology. And in grade 1, early American civilizations. You might not think mythology there, but actually we look at the Maya, the Inca, the Aztec, we look at some Maya mythology. Then you can see Greek myths in grade 2. We're going to touch on Greek mythology. In grade 3, we jump to the Viking Age. Well, Norse mythology comes out in grade 3. And then when we jump to grade 4, I've got the geology domain. And wait a minute, we're jumping from the Viking Age and social studies. Now we're going into science. Yeah, in geology, we hit upon Native American mythology in the Pacific Northwest, the Klamath Native Americans, in the formation of Crater Lake in Oregon. We also look at Native Hawaiian mythology, the formation of the Hawaiian Islands, the myths behind that. Then in grade 5, we go back to Native Americans and study creation stories and Native American mythology again. So those connections that kids make, and that's just one little example, but it doesn't always jump out when you look at the titles. So I hope that what you're using in your classrooms to build knowledge really addresses that, because it also addresses equity. It's all about equity. When my kiddos are talking and sharing and learning from me and from each other, we can all have this conversation. We don't have to be skilled multisyllabic word decoders to be able to access the text, because I'm reading aloud, they're sharing. As kids become more skilled readers, they're going to read the content, but they're still going to have rich discussions about this. It's all about building that, because we learn vocabulary from each other. Remember, it's that receptive and expressive vocabulary. So we want to bring those practices to kids to make sure it's on an equitable situation. we capitalize on the research. We leverage the research around reading aloud to kids and making that shift to when kids are the reading comprehension is catching up to their listening comprehension. So you're going to see in K-2, and I hope this is happening for you, that kids are getting those read alouds regularly. And we're going to continue that in the upper grade, but then they're actively reading because their reading comprehension has now become more available to them and more skilled in what they've learned with those foundational skills that Megan mentioned. How do we do that though, in terms of just that read aloud? Well, we're going to ask them lots of types of questions. We're going to put different kinds of, working on categorizing or sequencing. Those are going to be parts of those questions that we ask during that. And again, that relate to another portion of our rope. The rope threads are not just in isolation. They work together. And so that vocabulary builds with the knowledge and the language structure and the literacy knowledge. All of those things work in tandem. And so we're going to support our kids with those questions, getting them, with lots of engagement activities, with think, pair, shares, four corners activities, all of that to get them talking and build their language. We want to support kiddos who may come with language deficiencies, because we know with that next thread, the vocabulary thread, that vocabulary is one of those key things that can really hold kids back. So we really want to look at that in terms of, is the vocabulary really the selected choices that we really want to capitalize on when we are instructing kiddos? Are we giving them kid-friendly definitions that they can then, internalize and actually use? We want them utilizing that vocabulary. And so I'm going to show you a quick
video. Have a reservation?
I'm going to stop it for 1 second. I want you to think, as you're watching, just a little clip of this. We're looking at some insects. You might have already seen some insects on the prior slide. I want you to think about one of the tier 2 vocabulary words that we might have highlighted from this very little clip, because we've gone to the Beeswax Hotel. So we want you to listen to the grasshopper and the bee for a second. Whoop. Sorry, we're going to go back. Here.
You have a reservation? I do. Great. Just check you in and give you your activity schedule. How exciting. I hope the schedule includes plenty of time for all the things I love to do as a solitary insect.
Just keep that in mind as we move forward, as you're looking at another image and looking at what we're going to share with kiddos about the insects that they're hearing about, they're learning about, and the tier 2 vocabulary that we're highlighting. So notice, we're going to use the vocabulary in context. And I hope that's what you're doing, using that vocabulary in context, so then kids can then take that and use it in other contexts, in their own world. And we want them to talk about solitary and social beings. In the world that we live in right now, solitary and social are 2 words that kids can really relate to with their own connections. And we want them to. And then we also want them applying that. So the application is key. In this case, we talk about cooperate. Social insects must cooperate. And that we're going to explore in that read aloud. And they're going to then use that word. And we're going to ask them, how do you cooperate? What happens when you don't cooperate? Those kinds of things, and getting them using that vocabulary and applying it and talking about it and trying to really encourage. I love it when I go into classrooms and see teachers encouraging kids to use it in lots of different contexts and in different environments. Multiple meaning words are a big part of CKLA when we're looking at how do we support kids. And you can see here, because the word home may be something very simple for kids, but there are many meanings of that word. We're going to use images to share that with them that come from the read that are going to be applied, and that we're going to get them using those. Because again, that's where, that language development can hold kiddos back. Only having a basic knowledge of some words. Morphology also relates to that in terms of, especially as we move into the upper grades, that morphological aspect. Talked about that phonological, those skills that kiddos need, but they also need to be looking at the morphological. We don't want to start that just in the upper grades. That starts looking at complete and incomplete metamorphosis. And so we can talk about that prefix very simply as we relate these images to kiddos within the context of the content. And that's really key. In terms of language structure, are we helping kids to understand the sentence analysis? Are we helping them with the structure and the grammar? Are they hearing that through their conversations with others? Because whatever we're hearing is what we're going to repeat. And so we want those stories that we read aloud to kids to have that advanced sentence structure with its syntax that's embedded within the story that we can talk about. So in this case, you're seeing, we're going to talk about adverbs, and we do syntactic awareness activities based on that content. And again, we're going to talk about a grasshopper and how rapidly or slowly they might move wings. Again, we're inserting that grammar, that discussion about what the content is, so kids can relate to that, but getting kids connected. And here we're going to have them, it's definitely a multisensory approach where we're going to get kids clapping quickly or slowly, loudly, softly, all of those things. And again, it's all about an awareness. It's a language awareness where they're going to then see how they can about that, because they're going to apply it. And that's something that sometimes gets overlooked. It's all about that application. We're going to write about those social insects in this case versus the solitary ones, and they're going to use their journal to do that. So they're going to take that vocabulary, they're going to take that knowledge, and they're also then hopefully we're going to use some of the advanced sentence structures that they've heard when I've been reading aloud to them every day. And they're going to come up with this great journal and have a lot of fun with that as they're studying insects. This brings us also to the reasoning, the verbal reasoning that happens within those sentences that in the instruction that we may take for granted because we understand, the metaphors, the idioms, the language that is definitely something that holds our second language learners back, inferences that kiddos can make. Are we looking at text and using that as the instructional piece to help kids, with the kinds of questions we ask, those clues that we bring from the story, the also graphic organizers that we help or that we provide. In this case, we're looking at a social solitary insects. And again, we're putting it in another context here, looking at different wasps, some that are social, some that are solitary. But if you look at kind of the advanced sentence structures, these are the models that they're getting through language structure. They're also here getting a first person account from the insect. It's coming from the insect's perspective. I'd like to introduce you to a relative. This is a paper wasp. Well, we know that's not the teacher talking, that's the insect. And so that helps us, again, those threads are intertwined. That helps us, when we're talking about all of the content, as well as we move to that literacy knowledge, because we need kids to be exposed to a wide variety of literacy understanding. Sayings and phrases keep our kiddos back. And in terms of a proverb that kids might or might not have heard, have you ever heard that someone was eaten out of house and home? Well, we're going to relate it to insects. And so we're going to bring that understanding where kids are going to have to do some analysis of what does that really mean? Well, grasshoppers, some leaf hoppers, and the aphids or aphids, however you pronounce that, they do eat entire meadows at time, and that's their home, that's where they live. So that's a phrase that kind of relate to the insects. And how does that relate to humans when we use that phrase? So we want kids to be exposed to all of these wonderful types of language, because as we move to the last thread, the literacy knowledge portion, it all comes together. Do we provide kids with a wide variety of stories, of narratives in terms of first person, second person? Do we provide different, either nonfiction, the fiction? And that's what we need to do when we are building knowledge for kiddos. And that goes back to the sequence, that intentional sequence where we've got both literary and informational texts included. we're going to look at all the different structures, cause and effect. Obviously, these topics lend to that, those things like sequence, description, cause and effect, all of those things that are part of different types of text structures that kids, remember, the bottom line is, can they then take this, because we've worked with this, and into the upper grades and into, really the collegiate level and beyond, to do the things with reading and writing that are going to apply that. And again, they're going to write about that content using those graphic organizers, using those pieces to provide different types of writing. In this case, we're going to write an informational narrative, and we're going to do it from the insect's perspective in that first person. And so we want them to practice that in a variety of ways. And so you want to look for that as you're looking at what you're doing. And so if you want to learn more about CKLA, I mean, we've hit upon a lot. I know we may have given you a lot of information at once. We know it's a lot. We'd love for you to go to the Oklahoma page to learn more about CKLA and our roadmap, to help you get there, as well as thinking about, our webinar series, registering for those, and coming to hear more about the science of reading, because it's something that is definitely going to help your students. And Megan, if you want to share about some of the upcoming webinar series.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited. I know, as a former CKLA teacher, one of the best ways for us as a district to really hear about the program and learn about it, and also what we've seen with working with other educators, is that, I mean, we can sit here and show you CKLA all day, but to hear from an educator's experience is really invaluable. And so we encourage you to join our Science of Reading webinar series, where we're giving you an opportunity to do exactly that, to hear from CKLA educators on Thursday, December 9th. And also, if you're interested in learning about M-Class, Civil 8th edition, and also Amplify Reading, feel free to, we'd love for you to join us on Thursday, December 2nd, to hear from those customers. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this, no matter where you are on this journey and learning about the science of reading, we can give you, we're excited to share our Making the Shift ebook with you, to have that checklist of items to look for in your program you're currently using, or even when you're evaluating other core programs, making sure that it really puts science-based practices into action. And so we'll definitely share that with you. And as a reminder, as you continue this journey, be sure to join our Science of Reading podcast if you are not already a member. Best professional learning, easiest way to really learn about and unpack both sides of the reading rope. And so that's
Megan,
something we highly encourage you to do.
I have to interject here. I love to share, especially when I focus, because Megan and I talk to a lot of folks about a lot of different things, but when I'm heavily focused on that top half of Scarborough's rope, I bring up one of the researchers that's been interviewed, Dr. Sonia Cabell from the Florida Center for Reading Research, really digs into that language comprehension side of and a lot of research. And so I feel like I always have to share her name, because it's a great webinar to listen to.
Yeah, and Karen, you're exactly right. I think the top strand of the reading rope is really much more complex to unpack and really look at how that transfers into instruction. And Dr. Sonia Cabell really makes that research really accessible, and giving students that opportunity to read to learn from the get-go, starting in kindergarten. How can we do that as educators? So highly encourage you to listen to her podcast. But this is something we're really excited about as well. And this is the first time we're really sharing this, is we're actually sponsoring Plain Talk in New Orleans on February 9th through the 11th. And if you are a podcast listener, or hopefully by then you will be, we're actually hosting a live podcast here at Plain Talk, this really prestigious literacy conference where you get to hear from the most respected educator or researchers in the field when it comes to science-based reading instruction. So you can use this QR code to scan to register. Kristen, I agree, best conference ever. Karen and I will actually be there. So if you attend, come to the booth, say hello. You also have the opportunity to be featured on our Science Reading podcast, because we're going to be doing it live and hearing from educators like yourselves who are on this journey to make the shift. So definitely do that. And then after registering, come stop by the booth. But also, just another tool is looking at our Science of Reading website, scienceofreading.amplify.com. it's all about being a change agent, growing that movement within your district or school to understand the why behind this shift. So definitely going to this website to check it out. And then also, as we look at this, this is a community of learners. That's what we all are as educators. So be sure to join our Science of Reading, the community Facebook page, where you can hear from educators who are on this journey as well. And we'd like to thank you for joining today as we got to share with you some Science of Reading research, but also looking at how that really transfers into participation. And so thank you again.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that. Thank you all so much for joining. And I want to say too, I know we shared a lot of links here at the end. I'll be sending all of you an email with all of those links and follow up, and as well as the recording of this presentation. I also dropped a link in if you're interested in learning more about CKLA and would like a print sample. We'd love to get that out to you. I dropped a link to a Google form in there in the chat. I'll send that to you via email as well. So again, thank you so much for spending part of your Tuesday with us. We appreciate it, and we hope to talk to you very soon.
Yes, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Yeah, and I did just want to say, if you do want to hang around for questions, or we'll hang on the call for about another minute as you log off. If you have any questions, specific questions about Amplify CKLA, we'll get those answered for you.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Megan and Karen. That was fabulous, fabulous stuff.
You're welcome.
Fun. It's always fun.
All right, guys, if we don't have any questions, y'all have a great evening.
Yeah, you too. It looks like people are hopping off. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Happy December 1st tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. See you all soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.